Hi, my name is Eileen, and I'm 17 years old. Right now, my life has turned to hell. I'm having an unspoken war with my stepmother, who seems to want to get rid of me. Before, it was just my dad and I. My mom died when I was 10 years old. She just went to bed and didn't wake up. Turns out it was a blood clot that had burst. My dad wasn't ready to lose my mom. It came as a big shock to both of us. So, Dad and I lived together alone. After Mom died, Dad treated me very carefully, always came to dinner on time, gave me gifts, attended all my school events, and supported me in everything. All that time, Dad never dated anyone. He wouldn't even allow the thought of marrying again. He thought it was a betrayal of my mother. Dad had a business, building and selling real estate. One day, he went badly under with one property. Problems began with debts and a lack of money. That's when Dad's partner offered to cut him off with a deal. But the condition was that Dad had to marry his daughter, who had long been in love with him. The situation was so serious that Dad began to ponder his companion's offer.
Eileen, dear, I have a matter to discuss with you, but I'm afraid you won't like it.
Have you decided to accept Mr. Webster's offer?
I think so. Julia has no children, which means that she will love you as her own. And you need a mother, at least someone you can talk to.
Dad, do you even like her?
Well, she is an attractive woman, but I know for sure that I will not be able to love her as well as I did your mother. I'm just worried that you won't be able to get along with her.
I understand, Dad. I'll accept her as long as you're happy. And if you're ready to bring a woman into the house, I'll always support you. My words made my father feel better. For 2 months, there were thorough preparations for the wedding. The celebration was very lavish. Dad's companion was a very rich and influential man, so the guests seemed to be more than 1,000. Dad was very reserved on the day of his wedding. There was no way I could understand how he felt. After the wedding, Dad and Julia flew off on a honeymoon to Italy. I was looking forward to it. I wanted to be friends with my father's new wife as soon as possible. Yes, I was jealous, but I was willing to accept her into our home for Dad's sake. One day I came home from university and saw suitcases on the doorstep. Turns out they'd arrived back 2 days early. Dad had some urgent business to attend to. I quickly rushed into the house and met my father.
Darling, I have to leave urgently for a meeting.
Welcome home, Dad.
Julia's going to take a shower and then she'll rest. Don't bother her. And there's a surprise for you in your room.
Okay, thank you so much. I kissed him on the cheek and he left the house. I happily ran upstairs to my bedroom. Dad always brought me presents from his trips, and it was never limited to just a couple of boxes. I ran into my room and saw dozens of different bags of clothes, souvenirs, cosmetics, and equipment. I started taking everything out of the bags, looking at it, and trying it on. Then I felt a strange look. I turned my head to the door and saw Julia in the doorway.
Are you looking at your presents?
Yes, Dad always spoils me after his trips.
Well, yes, he does.
She grinned weirdly.
Well, I'm going to rest after the trip. Can you keep your voice down?
Yes, of course. Okay. That's all I could say. I was so angered by her tone of voice, and also by that weird smile of hers. What was that all about? I was at a loss. That evening, my father came home and we sat down to dinner. Julia began to boast that she'd cooked everything herself, but I knew that the cook was the woman she'd hired. My father began to praise the food she'd prepared, and his wife smiled sweetly. Julia and I didn't seem to be fighting, but our relationship was strained. I knew that she was deliberately trying to break up my relationship with my father, but she always did it covertly. On the days when I wasn't studying for exams and went out with friends, she would lock the door and tell my dad that I wasn't coming home that night, and I just had to ask my friends to sleep over. I didn't say anything to my dad. I didn't want him to get in trouble. He'd been all over me all these years, and he hadn't even tried to find a woman for himself. I could see that my father really liked Julia. Of course, there was no love lost there. One day I stayed too long at the library and came home late. I pulled at the doorknob, but I already knew it was locked. There's that awful woman playing tricks on me again, I thought, and wandered along the street. As I walked, I tried to figure out who to sleep at this time. 2 streets later, I noticed a woman sitting on the terrace of her house. I also thought it was too late for a walk. I looked closely and realized she wasn't feeling well. I ran up to her quickly. She was pale, and there were drops of sweat on her forehead. "Are you all right? Are you okay?" She whispered that she was having an asthma attack and urgently needed an inhaler, which was on the nightstand in the hallway. I ran into the house and fetched it. The neighbor took a few deep drags. Then she said her name was Miranda. "Thank you so much. I was on the verge of... Are you feeling better now? Should we call an ambulance?" "I'm fine. I just need to catch my breath, and that's all. I have asthma, and I'm used to having attacks." So Miranda and I got to talking. I told her that I was going to spend the night at a friend's house, but that she wasn't answering her phone, and the woman offered to spend the night at her place. After all, we lived next door to each other, and we could be considered neighbors. In the kitchen, over a cup of coffee, I told Miranda about the difficult situation in my family. She told me about her son and how her husband had been dead for 10 years. We became friends, and I became a frequent visitor at Miranda's. She's such a sweet woman and kind. And it turned out we both loved books. Miranda also had a son, Ernie. She said he was in university studying dentistry and was very rarely home. She was bored and didn't have anyone to talk to, and she could use some help around the house, so I often went shopping for her. One day, Miranda asked me to buy milk and bread on the way home, so I did. It was half dark in the house. I went in and called out to Miranda, but it was quiet. I went into the kitchen, and suddenly, I heard some sounds upstairs. I decided to go upstairs to the bedroom to see if she was there. Suddenly, I found myself bumping into a man's bare chest. My squeal must have deafened half the street. There was no way I was expecting to see a man in my neighbor's house. He grabbed me abruptly and put his hand over my mouth. I started to pull away and elbowed him in the eye. He was like, "What the hell? Who are you? A thief? I'm gonna call the police." "Who the hell are you? What are you doing in Miranda's house? And you're half naked." "Oh, I get it. You're Eileen, her new friend." He laughed and removed the hand he'd been using to cover his injured eye. And then I recognized him as Ernie. I'd only seen him in pictures before. Turns out he was visiting his mother for his vacation. Miranda caught us drinking tea and milk in the kitchen. Naturally, Ernie had already put his shirt on. When she saw us, her smile became strange. You could say sly. After that evening, the 3 of us got together often, playing board games, baking pies, and discussing books. I liked Ernie immediately. He was smart, well-read, and gallant. We began to talk a lot, getting to know each other better, and our communication slowly turned into a romantic relationship, which Miranda was definitely happy about. Meanwhile, at home, things were getting worse. Julia was purposely picking fights with my father. She said I hated her and left the house on purpose. At first, my father ignored her words, but over time, he began to demand that I spend more time with his new wife. I noticed that I started to feel bad every single night. I just thought it was the stress of my upcoming exams. I was haunted by constant fatigue, nausea, and dizziness. In order not to upset my dad more, I began to stay home. One day, I found my beloved cat Ellie dead on the front porch. It was so strange. Ellie wasn't even 3 years old when my dad gave her to me on my birthday. Ernie and I took her to the vet, and they told us, oh horror, that my cat had been poisoned. A simple rat poison. Meanwhile, my health was deteriorating dramatically. By the way, I noticed that whenever I ate dinner at Miranda's, I felt better. I wondered if it was Julia. But no, it couldn't be. Ernie was worried sick, and one day, when I met him, I told him about my suspicions. That's when he suggested I put a hidden camera in the kitchen of my house. I refused to for a long time, but I had to agree eventually under Ernie's pressure. We decided not to tell Miranda or my father about what was going on. We thought that for such a huge accusation, we needed solid proof. I suggested that my father meet Miranda and Ernie for dinner, and while Julia fussed in the living room, Ernie discreetly set up the camera in the kitchen. Dinner went surprisingly smoothly, even though my father kept his eyes on Miranda. Julia was ready to kill everyone present. I offered to help with the dishes, and Ernie volunteered with me. We went into the kitchen, pulled out the camera to watch the tape, and froze in horror. I flew into the living room and started yelling at Julia that I was going to call the police. I was so distraught. My father didn't understand and tried to calm me down somehow. I showed my father the videotape that showed his new wife slipping some kind of powder into our plates. "It was you who poisoned Ellie! She died because you gave her rat poison!"
Eileen, what are you talking about?
"Daddy, you can see for yourself. And the vet said Ellie was poisoned." Dad stood silent for a while, like a statue, and then he turned sharply to Julia.
"Get out of our house, and don't let me see you ever again. Thank your father that I won't turn you in to the police."
Julia looked at me with hatred. Then she turned and left. It took us a long time to come to our senses. Miranda tried to comfort us all by pouring hot tea. We sat in the living room together for a long time, until I went to bed and Ernie and his mother went home. After that night, Dad and Miranda started to talk a lot. I could see that they liked each other, and after a while, they started dating. And I went to the same university as Ernie. We rented a small apartment and got a cat named Tom. My former stepmother never came into my happy life again.